right, guys. So now we're going to get into the nitty gritty of things, but there's a couple more things I wanted to say. These are only my views and my experiences. These are not going to work for everybody, but hopefully they will, and they've worked great for me. So I want to pass it on to you guys. Uh, when you're dealing with tenants, you please have to have the mentality to deal with tenants, their qualms. You can get some good tenants, you can get some bad tenants. You're going to learn the system a little better as you go along. But you have to be able to throw people out. The way you need to look at it is if they're not paying their bills, you're not paying your bills. So you guys have to remember that. You have to have the mentality or you're going to be miserable doing this. The money you make when you buy a property, and people said this before, is when you purchase the property. So if you're looking for an investment property, you're going to have to buy something that's going to be below market value. So immediately jumping into it, you have equity built into the property. One thing I learned, and I told you when I first graduated from college, within a week or two, I bought my first rental property, and I didn't have any money. Do not rely on that rental income to come in to pay your bills, because that's going to make you miserable, and it's really going to turn you off from buying real estate. When a tenant didn't pay rent, it was hard for me to pay the mortgage because I had a job coming out of college, and it really turned me off. But just make sure when you buy a property, buy within your means at first, and make sure it's something you can afford if you do not have the income coming in from your tenant. Don't rush into getting a tenant. Don't let the first person apply get the place. Do some background. Make sure that they're going to be right for your property. I know it may be a desperate time to get some money in your pocket and you don't want the property to sit there, but trust me, in the end, you're going to want a good tenant, because that tenant moves out that you chose that was first, ends up being a bad tenant. You're going to have to pay a lot more money tenfold than if you just waited an extra month for that tenant. You need to look at it as a tenant moving in for, we'll say, January and February. They move out end of February. You can say that March and April, you're going to need to renovate the place, get it fixed back up, clean, whatever you need to do, and then you're going to take some time to find it. So you're going to be out 2 months. So you're 2 months in, 2 months out. You don't want that. You want to find a tenant that's going to be there for the long run and make your job easier. So do not wait for, or wait for a good tenant. Do not jump in the first tenant that applies to get your property. What I've learned also, when I first began, I was immature in the process. I believe I was 22 when I bought my first property, but some of my tenants that I had were older than me, so yeah, it felt pretty cool to have a property and to be a landlord. So whenever a tenant called me, they knew I was the man to talk to. They knew I was the owner, that there was nobody else to go to. So whatever the final word was mine. I highly recommend you tell your tenants that you have business partners that are above you. Tell them that you're the low man on the totem pole. So when they ask you for something, you say, well, let me go talk to the other owners and see what I can do. And if you don't feel like doing it, just say, hey, I talked to the other owners. It's not a good idea. Let's wait and see. Or if they're going to be late on rent, say, I talked to the other owners. What we can do is cut your late payment in half this month. Like I said, you have to have that mentality to throw people out. Now, you can have, obviously, there's different types of properties you can purchase. You can have a condo, duplexes, multifamily, and single family. They all have their pros and cons. If you're looking into getting into real estate to build equity in a property and for the value to increase, you're going to want to go with a single family home. With that being said, when you get into a single family home, you now have things you don't really think about, but who's going to be in charge of the lawn service? You're going to be in charge of the lawn service. Why? Because if your tenants don't cut the lawn, you got to cut the lawn. Any maintenance issues, it's going to be you're responsible anyways. But when you deal with a single family property, there's more things you need to worry about. Bigger investment, bigger payoff most of the time. When you look at duplexes, condos, multifamily, you need to consider and you need to look into at first if there's association fees, because most of the time here in Georgia, there is. Association fees aren't bad if you're making enough on rent and your mortgage payment isn't too large, um, because when you get into associations, they're essentially here in Georgia responsible for the roof, any outside structure. So anything from the studs in, you're responsible for. Anything on the outside, they're responsible for. So now, when you're paying your association fee, they are cutting the lawn, maintaining the property, maintaining the roads. The roof, there's a roof problem, you call the HOA, association fees. It'll get it done. With a primary residence, you're not going to have that. You're paying for common areas to be taken care of. Usually in condos, duplexes, multifamilies, the association covers the rest of the stuff. So that's something you need to consider. Like I said, when you have an association fees, they're responsible for cutting the common and maintenance areas, roofs. They're usually responsible for the fascia, awnings, stuff like that. Is normally taken care of by the association fees. The offset of that is association fees. So that's one thing you need to consider, and I've considered that on a few properties too. Do I want to continue to deal with a single family and dealing with roofs, and if the tenant doesn't mean the property, you got to step in because the city will fine you. It's happened to me before, so you got to be careful of that. Buying real estate is really, unless it's a downward economy, is one of the only things you can actually purchase that increase in value, which is great, and that's why I love real estate. When you get into, say, a 30-year mortgage, say your mortgage is $1,000 a month. $1,000 these days is not going to be the same as $1,000 20 years from now. So you can look at it that way, but you also need to realize what you're paying in interest. And if you ever want to ruin your mood for some strange reason, grab an amortization calculator and look how much interest you pay on a 30-year mortgage. It's incredible how much you pay, and that's why I always pay my properties off years in advance. As I said before, you want to reduce your headache. So when you look at a single family, duplex, if you can afford, and I keep jumping around and I apologize, but if you really want to get free and clear of this property, pay it off as quickly as possible. Within your means, make sure you have money set aside for incidentals that may come up on the rise, water heaters, AC units, garage door openers, anything you could possibly imagine on your house can happen to a tenant. And trust me, every problem that there's going on there, your tenant's going to call you about. Next thing I want to talk about is how you want to set up a possible LLC or a corporation to offset some of your liability.